My parents abandoned my grandma for me to take care of. I had to drop out of college to take care of her. But when she died, they showed up at her funeral demanding their share of the properties. They said I was nobody and deserved nothing. When the lawyer came, there was a big surprise. Let me tell you how everything happened. Before then, if you are new here and you enjoy stories like this one, kindly subscribe to this channel, and feel free to let us know where you are listening to us from. Now let's get into the details of the story. The priest said her name like it was a stone in his mouth, weighty, unfamiliar, something he wanted to set down as fast as possible. The wind shoved the trees sideways as they lowered her casket into the cold earth, and all I could think about was how many nights I'd sat beside her hospital bed, whispering stories into ears that sometimes remembered me and sometimes didn't. I was holding the back of her old wheelchair, not because anyone needed it, but because I didn't know where else to put my hands. My father wore his funeral tie, the one he kept in the glove box. My mother kept checking her phone like she was waiting on a dinner reservation. Neither of them cried. They stood 2 feet away from me, maybe 3, and didn't look once in my direction. Not when the shovel scraped dirt, not when the flowers were laid, not even when the lawyer approached me first. That's when my father's head turned. That's when I saw it begin. I didn't even get a call when she fell. The neighbor told me, Mrs. Kenner, 2 houses down, who sometimes brought over soup when I didn't have the energy to cook. The hospital rang my parents first. They never picked up. I remember standing in the hallway outside the emergency room, holding my cracked phone, scrolling through my last text to my mom. She's getting worse. I think we need to talk. It had 2 gray check marks. No reply. That was 6 months before she died. I dropped out of college that same week. Sold the textbooks. Got a part-time job at the pharmacy 2 towns over because it let me keep an eye on her meds. They didn't ask why I left. No one did. It's easy to disappear when people have already deleted the version of you they were proud of. The version with scholarships. With potential. Not the one who changed diapers on a woman who once taught calculus and now screamed at mirrors. Some nights I'd wake to the sound of her trying to unlock the front door with a spoon. Other nights, she'd curl up on the living room carpet like a child, holding a framed photo of me from 2nd grade, whispering my name. I had to install alarms, hide the keys, baby-proof the oven. I lost count of the times I filled out forms and ticked the primary caregiver box with a pen I could barely grip from shaking. But she still had her days. Her soft, honey-clear days when she'd sit on the porch and hum her favorite melody. On one of those days, one of the last, she handed me something strange. A sealed blue envelope, stiff and taped closed. Not yet, she said. You'll know when. I laughed. Asked if it was a love letter to her old bridge partner. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, then looked away, like she already knew she was disappearing piece by piece. And I didn't ask again. My parents reappeared 2 hours before the funeral, pulling up in a rented black car with tinted windows and voices full of manufactured grief. They hugged people they barely knew, claimed to be devastated. My mother pulled me aside at the cemetery gates, her voice all sugar and thorns. We'll handle the estate, she said. We know this has been overwhelming for you. I looked at her. Looked straight through her. I was wearing my grandmother's cardigan under my coat. The one she used to keep draped over her favorite chair. The one with a coffee stain shaped like a question mark. I hadn't washed it. I wanted the smell of her to last just a little longer. My father coughed. Let's not make this difficult, he muttered. You were just here, doing what needed to be done. That doesn't make you family. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but something about hearing it next to her grave made it feel like a knife through glass. When the lawyer showed up with a briefcase and condolences, he walked straight toward me, called me by name, said my grandmother had left instructions that I be consulted personally. I saw the flicker then, the crack in my parents' performance. My mother's hand clenched around her designer purse. My father cleared his throat too loudly. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just nodded once and followed the lawyer back to his car. I sat in the passenger seat, hands still trembling, the air thick with old cologne and whatever grief hadn't been invited into that funeral. He handed me a packet. We'll do the reading tomorrow, he said. But I thought you should see this now. On top was a letterhead I recognized, the same one on the blue envelope still taped under my dresser drawer. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe some part of me knew that once I read it, everything would change. The house smelled like dried flowers and reheated guilt when I walked back in. They were already inside, my parents, arguing softly in the kitchen like they just stepped out to buy milk and returned after a decade. My father opened cabinets with the arrogance of someone who thought inheritance was a right, not a privilege. My mother complained about the dust, wiping her hand across the windowsill like she was preparing a real estate showing. They didn't ask if I was staying. They didn't ask how long I'd been here. The moment they saw the lights still worked, the fridge was stocked, and the house hadn't collapsed under neglect, they assumed it was theirs. I stood in the hallway, listening to them stake claims on furniture they hadn't touched in years. "This table should go," my mother said, tapping the one we used for her pill schedule. "It's warped." It was water damaged, yes, from the night my grandmother had a seizure and I spilled a bowl of soup trying to reach her. I'd never told anyone, but that table held more reality than either of them ever had. I went upstairs to her bedroom because I couldn't stand the sound of them dividing a life they abandoned. I opened the closet, half expecting to still smell her lavender sachets, but the air was already fading into something flatter, emptier. Her robe was still hanging where I'd left it the day she died. The sleeves limp. The blue envelope was still there too, taped under the drawer. I touched it this time, just my fingertips, but didn't peel the tape. I told myself it was because there were bigger things to deal with first. The will reading, the lawyer's meeting, the mess they were about to create downstairs. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to feel whatever was inside it. Not yet. Some letters break you before they rebuild you, and I was still in pieces too jagged to be rearranged. Instead, I picked up her slippers and lined them neatly at the foot of the bed. Like maybe she'd come home if I just pretended hard enough. They started taking boxes out of the attic that night. Just like that. Not even a full 24 hours after she was buried. These should be inventoried. My father said like he was an executor, not a ghost. I came downstairs holding a stack of her medical receipts, and found him rifling through her jewelry. "Don't touch that," I said. He didn't look up. "It's part of the estate," he replied, calm as glass. My mother chimed in from the hallway, holding one of Grandma's framed photos. "We'll need to appraise the house too," she said. "The market's still decent." Esther daher. "You didn't even call when she was hospitalized." Her lips curled like I was being dramatic. "We assumed you'd handle it," she said. "You always had that helper instinct." Helper. Not granddaughter. Not family. Helper. Like I was a live-in nurse who overstayed their contract. I said nothing. I went into the bathroom and threw up silently into the sink. That night, I lay awake on the floor of the guest room with a blanket that still smelled like disinfectant. My air mattress had a slow leak. Every hour, I sank closer to the hardwood. I could hear them in the next room making calls, laughing, discussing the business like they owned it. "She left the company to us, I'm sure of it," my father said. "She wouldn't leave it to the girl. That'd be insane." My mother replied. She was confused toward the end. Probably didn't know what she was doing. "They kept calling me the girl, like I was a temporary inconvenience, not the person who had changed her diapers, read her emails aloud when she forgot how to use a keyboard, spoon-fed her oatmeal during the weeks she couldn't swallow. But they didn't see that version of her. They didn't want to. They wanted the tidy obituary version. Founder of Vale and Company, charitable matriarch, brilliant businesswoman. They wanted the shell without ever holding the body. A voicemail came in just before midnight. I sat up and replayed it 5 times just to hear it right. It was from the lawyer. "Miss Vale, I'll be finalizing the documents in the morning. Per her instructions, we'll need you at the office for the will reading. You're named in multiple clauses. Please don't be late." The tone was professional, but I heard something underneath it. A curiosity, maybe even a warning. Something about the way he said multiple clauses felt like a secret unfolding. I stared at the voicemail screen until it dimmed. Then I pulled the envelope out from the drawer, sat on the edge of the bed, and held it. I almost opened it. Almost. But instead I put it back. I wasn't ready to touch the core of whatever she'd left behind. Not yet. Some truths don't reveal themselves until they're needed. And whatever this was, it was waiting for the right kind of silence. The next morning they were dressed early. My mother wore heels, the ones she only took out for courtroom drama. My father had on a navy blazer, shoulders squared like he expected a negotiation. They asked if I was going. I nodded. "Don't be late," my father said like it was his meeting. I watched them drive off ahead of me, saw the way they looked through the rearview mirror like they were watching a threat shrink. But they had no idea what she'd done. No idea what power she'd left in my hands. And honestly, neither did I. But I had a feeling, that deep gut-pricking kind of feeling, that whatever came next wouldn't end the way they imagined. Because the house wasn't hollow. Not really. It remembered. And it had a witness. Me. The lawyer's office was on the 3rd floor of a glass-paneled building that smelled like ink and air conditioning. I got there 5 minutes early and waited outside, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending I didn't see my parents inside already. Sitting on opposite ends of a mahogany couch, both sipping bottled water, like they were the ones who needed comfort. My mother was wearing the string of pearls she'd always said made her look credible. And my father had that look in his eyes, tight-jawed focus, like a man who thinks paperwork is just a formality before he wins. The receptionist glanced at me with polite confusion. "You're here for the veil reading?" she asked. I nodded. "There you're." She trailed off, unsure what word to use. "Family? Enemies? Legal opponents?" "Yes," I said. "They're mine." She led me in like I was a client, not a relative. That was the first shift. The first time I felt it. The tide turning. The lawyer, Mr. Brenner, was a man built like a rulebook, precise, square, impossible to read. He shook all our hands and gestured to 3 chairs around a long wooden table. My parents tried to sit beside him, but he directed me to the middle seat, and for a second I saw my father flinch. Just a blink, but it was there. "As executor of Margaret Vale's estate," Brenner began, "it is my duty to read her will aloud, in full, and to oversee the distribution of her assets as she stipulated." My mother crossed her legs. My father folded his arms. I sat perfectly still. "Margaret Vale leaves behind 3 major holdings," Brenner continued. 1. The residential property at 43 Lambert Street. 2. The totality of her shares in M. Vale and Company. 3. All remaining financial and material assets, including liquid savings, investment portfolios, and tangible possessions. These assets, pending conditional approval, are to be distributed among her legal heirs. My father exhaled like it was already done, but then Brenner paused, looked at me. "The clause," he said, pulling out a single sheet from a separate envelope, "was handwritten and witnessed 3 years ago. It states that while her children, Mr. and Mrs. Vale, are named recipients of her estate, distribution is subject to the approval of Miss Wren Vale, her sole caregiver and the only individual residing with her during the final 3 years of her life." My mother blinked. "Subject to what?" she asked, her voice thin. "Approval," he repeated calmly. "You'll receive nothing unless Wren, your daughter, signs the release document." My father laughed. A short, ugly sound. "She can't do that," he said. "That's not even enforceable." Brenner turned to him, like he was used to these reactions. "It's been reviewed by 2 separate probate attorneys. It's valid. It was Margaret Vale's final and legal decision." My mother sat frozen, the color gone from her mouth. "That's ridiculous," she whispered. She was sick. She didn't understand what she was doing. I leaned back in my chair. Said nothing. Just watched them start to drown. They didn't argue with me directly at first. They went after the paper. They asked for copies, called their own lawyers, threatened to sue the firm. But nothing changed. The clause stood. It always stood. The next week I got a package at the house. Inside, flowers from my mother and a card with her old handwriting, the looped cursive she used when trying to sound maternal. "We know this is a lot, but we hope you'll see the bigger picture. Let's keep things peaceful." I put the card in the drawer next to the envelope. 2 days later, my father left a voicemail. "Wren, we're family. This can't come between us. Just sign the thing and we'll make sure you're taken care of." The way he said "taken care of" made something cold settle in my stomach, like I was a problem to be managed, a chess piece they assumed they could move. I didn't respond. I just sat on the back steps that night and watched the light in Grandma's room go out for the last time. The pressure started quietly. Cousin reached out on Facebook. "They're saying you're holding everything hostage, that she wasn't in her right mind. Are you okay?" Then came the emails from former employees of the company, sympathetic but distant. Some offered condolences. Others offered bribes. We'd love to support you in whatever way ensures business continuity. As if my grief came with a price tag. As if my silence was negotiable. But I remembered what it felt like. Sitting on the bathroom floor with Grandma's pill bottle in one hand and a billing notice in the other, knowing no one was coming to help. I remembered the raw stench of infection the week she got bedsores, how I cried into a towel so she wouldn't hear me break. I remembered that moment when she looked up half lucid and said, "Don't let them pretend." That line. I didn't understand it then. I do now. She knew who they were. She left me the only weapon they would understand. The power to say no. The meeting to sign or not sign. The release form was scheduled for Friday. I showed up wearing the same gray coat I'd worn to her funeral. No makeup. No jewelry. Just the envelope in my pocket, still unopened. Like it was a compass pointing somewhere I hadn't dared look yet. My parents were already inside the conference room. Their lawyer whispering things in their ears like he was warning them about me. When I entered, my father stood up. "We want to make a proposal," he said, calm but sharp-edged. "We split everything. Even. No hard feelings." I nodded slowly. So half the care. Half the diapers. Half the night she couldn't remember her name. His jaw flexed. "Don't be petty," he muttered. My mother tried. She would want us together. I looked her straight in the eye. She wanted me to decide. I took the pen, flipped open the file, and left the signature line blank. "I'm not approving distribution," I said. "Not today. Not ever." Then I stood up, walked out, and didn't look back. They didn't come in person after that. Cowards don't beg face to face. They use distance as armor. The first email arrived at 1:07 a.m., subject line, "Be reasonable." It was from my mother, but I could tell my father had dictated it. The sentences were too clean, too calculated. She wrote, "This isn't about punishment, Ren. You're emotional. You've been through a lot. We all have. Let's sit down and find a compromise." I didn't respond. I just read it again and again until the edges of the screen blurred, and my hand went numb from holding the phone too tightly. They didn't call me Ren at the funeral. They didn't call me anything at all. And now they wanted my name in their mouths when they needed a signature. Emotional. That was the word that stuck. That was the word men use when women don't cave. I closed the message and blocked the address. If they wanted access, they'd have to come through more than a screen. The next week was quiet but not empty. The silence felt like a vacuum pressurizing, waiting to burst. I moved out of the house before they could try to claim it as an asset they were graciously letting me stay in. I found a studio apartment above a hardware store 3 towns away, where no one knew my last name. The walls were thin, and the radiator clicked like it was trying to start a war with the floorboards, but it was mine. I slept on a mattress on the floor, and made coffee with the old French press I used during Grandma's final days. I brought exactly 3 boxes with me. Clothes, books, and her documents. The envelope stayed sealed. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But I kept it on my nightstand like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, I got a part-time job at a late-night diner. Graveyard shift. Greasy light. The kind of job no one asks questions in. And I liked it that way. I liked how invisible I could be, even with her name still weighing down my back. 2 weeks after I declined the release, my father left me a voicemail. His voice was the same sharp, direct, that corporate casual tone he used to use on interns. "Ren, I've reviewed the clause again. I think you're confused about its legal reach. There's precedent. There's pushback. If you're trying to hurt us, fine. You've succeeded. But this isn't over." He didn't say my name with love. He said it like a threat. I didn't delete the message. I replayed it while eating a gas station sandwich on my break. Then I opened a new browser tab and started reading about M. Vale and Company. The business they'd forgotten was now half mine in practice, if not yet in writing. I found out things they probably thought were buried. Discrepancies in filings, old lawsuits settled out of court, silent partners with names I recognized from shady dinner parties as a kid. The deeper I dug, the more I saw the truth. The company wasn't thriving. It was surviving. Barely. And they needed the inheritance not to expand, but to plug the holes. I called a forensic accountant. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew what rot smelled like. She asked for records. I gave her everything I had. Within a week, she called back. There's some creative math in their ledgers. Ghost payments. Duplicated invoices. Things that could be accidents, but probably aren't. I asked her what would happen if I made that public. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said they'd be ruined. That was the moment I understood. They weren't just afraid of losing Grandma's estate, they were desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. Makes them text you at 3 a.m. saying we were just trying to protect the company. You don't understand the pressures we were under. She wouldn't want this hostility. My mother sent that one. No subject line. Just guilt in digital form. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer with the subject. Keep for records. They tried other tactics. My father offered a monthly stipend. My mother promised I could live in the house rent-free if I signed. Think of it as a thank you for everything you've done, she wrote. Gratitude is bribery. I almost laughed. They didn't know how to operate outside of manipulation. Every kindness from them had strings embedded, like barbed wire dipped in honey. I sat with that email open, remembering the night my grandmother wandered into the street barefoot, convinced she was late for work, and how I'd had to carry her home while cars honked and neighbors watched from behind curtains. No one was there for me. Just me and her in the dark. That's what they never saw. That's what they never earned the right to benefit from. I didn't sign. I never would. I wanted them to sit in that space between assumption and consequence. I wanted them to feel the air thinning. I knew they'd eventually push harder, maybe even legally. But I also knew something they didn't. She left me more than authority. She left me clarity. That clause wasn't revenge, it was a test. A mirror. And they were failing it. Every attempt to coerce me, every lie, every half-hearted apology, it all confirmed she'd seen them clearly, even when the rest of the world still called them respectable. She saw through them. She gave me the final word. And I wasn't going to whisper it. I was going to make them wait for it. Make them watch the world realize they were drowning. And I'd be on shore dry, unshaken, unreadable. They tried civility first. It lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days of forced smiles, bad coffee shop meetings, and soft, suffocating language. My mother invited me to lunch at a restaurant I couldn't afford, ordered a salad she didn't eat, and said things like, "We know things got complicated." She smiled like someone trying not to gag. I didn't speak for 10 straight minutes. I just watched her unravel in her silence. Eventually, she leaned forward and said, "You've made your point, Ren. You were here. You did the work. But that doesn't mean you get to erase us." I stirred my water with the straw. "I'm not erasing anyone," I said. "You did that yourselves." She blinked, face cracking just slightly. Then she said the most honest thing I think she ever did. "You don't understand how much we need this." That was the problem. I did understand. And that was why they'd never get it. The next day, my father called and suggested we go over some numbers together. That's how he framed it. Like we were business partners. I agreed to meet him, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to see how far he'd fallen without showing it. He booked a conference room at a co-working space in the city. When I walked in, he was already standing, pointing at a spreadsheet on his laptop, talking about revenue loss like it was weather. "We're down 17% since Q3, he said. "Margins are tight. The inheritance, it isn't just an asset. It's a stabilizer." He sounded like a man trying to sell a lifeboat while already underwater. I asked him one question. How much of the revenue loss is connected to the cash transfers from the Shell LLC in Delaware? He stopped talking, stopped blinking. I didn't need him to confess. I had the forensic reports. I had the emails. I had the timestamps. He sat down slowly. "What do you want?" he asked. Quiet. Flat. The arrogance gone. "To watch," I said. "I want to watch you not get away with it." They stopped pretending after that. The gloves came off and the threats came in. I received a cease and desist letter from their attorney accusing me of abuse of power and undue influence. I framed it and hung it in my studio kitchen. My mother left a voicemail saying she regretted ever trusting me with her. She didn't say her mother. Just her. Like Grandma had become property again. A burden they'd outsourced and now wanted to cash in on. I started locking my apartment door twice. Switched to a new email. Closed my social media. But none of it shook me. I'd been invisible before. I knew how to survive without a nameplate, without family, without approval. I'd lived in the quiet margins for 3 years, while they lived in performance. Now I was the one writing the script, and they couldn't even find the stage. What they didn't realize, what they'd never realize, is that it wasn't the inheritance that gave me power. It was the silence, the choice. Every time I didn't answer, they felt it like static in their teeth. Every time I didn't bend, didn't flinch, didn't rush to explain myself, it gutted them. Because for people like that, silence is worse than screaming. It means they don't matter. And they'd spent their whole lives building lives that only worked if they mattered. I declined every meeting request, ignored every veiled threat. Instead, I called my lawyer and had him draft a formal statement. I, Ren Vale, do not consent to the release or transfer of any part of Margaret Vale's estate to the named parties, per Clause C of the sealed will. This decision is final. It was only a few lines long, but when I handed it in, I felt lighter. Like I'd stepped off a ledge I didn't know I was clinging to. Then I did something they never saw coming. I requested a meeting, not with them, but with the company's board. Technically, they couldn't deny me. As a beneficiary with potential controlling interest, pending clause conditions, I had the right. I walked in with a clean suit, a digital presentation and evidence. Not threats, not accusations, just facts. Paper trails, silent rot. I didn't say take them down. I just asked questions they couldn't answer. Why was there a $200K shortfall in supplier payments? Why was a consultant fee paid to a firm that doesn't exist anymore? Why is your founder's daughter being shut out of all internal reporting? I didn't even have to raise my voice. I just left the folder on the table and walked out. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had 6 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 2 from my father, and 1 from an unknown number I suspected was someone in damage control. I didn't answer. I opened the window, let the air in, and listened to the sound of panic coming from miles away. They would lose everything. Not in a blaze, but in a slow, humiliating collapse. No scandal, no courtroom drama. Just investors pulling out. Board votes shifting. Quiet firings. Frozen assets. A decay too boring for headlines, but permanent enough to stain. They still didn't know how deep I'd cut. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I just watched them corner themselves into a room they built with lies and now couldn't escape. And the best part was, it wasn't revenge. Not really. It was refusal. I refused to let them rewrite the past. Refused to give them the ending they expected, where I snapped or begged or forgave too soon. They wanted a confession. I gave them consequence. Quiet.
Permanent.
Irreversible. The final letter wasn't dramatic. It didn't come in a red envelope. There were no bolded words or legal threats in all caps. It arrived in a pale cream envelope, embossed in quiet authority, and delivered by a courier with tired eyes who barely looked up when I signed for it. Inside was a statement of forfeiture. Formal language. Flat paper. It read like a final breath. Per Clause C of the last will and testament of Margaret Vale, the distribution of assets to the previously named parties is hereby nullified by veto of the power holder. Effective immediately. Just like that, it was done. The house, the company, the investments, all frozen, all severed. And with that signature, I ended something that had festered for decades beneath polite dinner conversations and holiday cards sent out of obligation. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't even smile. I just stared at the sentence until the words bled into each other, and the silence around me felt like armor. They found out the same way I did on paper. My father called. Twice. I didn't answer. My mother texted. What have you done? I read it. Didn't reply. I didn't owe them closure. I didn't owe them anything. But I still wanted them to feel it. Not the loss, not just the money, but the distance. The vanishing. So I sent them each a letter. 1 sentence long. Handwritten. No return address. Just 5 words. She never stopped asking why. That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just the truth they had refused to face when she was alive and lucid, and still hoping they'd call. I imagined them reading it, her voice echoing somewhere in their memory, sharp and soft all at once. Maybe they'd wonder what moment I was referring to. Maybe they'd pretend not to understand. But they'd know. Somewhere deep, under the justifications and the polished self-pity, they'd know they were the question mark that never got answered. The board removed my father from the company 2 weeks later. Unanimous vote, the report said. No press release. No fanfare. Just a quiet stripping of power. My mother filed an appeal to the estate ruling. It was denied in under 4 hours. She sent a last email, rambling, desperate, accusatory. She didn't understand what she was doing. You manipulated her. You always hated us. You're not family. You're just a girl who waited around for an old woman to die. That line almost made me laugh. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so small, so far beneath the weight of what had actually happened. I didn't write back, but I did print it out and fold it into the back of the blue envelope, still sealed, still unread. Some things you wait for, some things you never open at all. The envelope had become more than paper. It was a mirror. A line between what I'd survived and what I'd chosen. I kept working at the diner. Not because I needed the money, at this point the estate was mine to manage, but because I liked the rhythm of it. The late-night regulars. The smell of burnt toast. The hum of something steady and dull. People asked if I'd move. If I'd buy a house, travel, start over. But starting over doesn't always mean running. Sometimes it means staying on your own terms in your own silence. I visited the cemetery once. Just once. I sat beside her grave and read aloud from the letter I'd never sent her. They wanted it all, and I gave them nothing. But I think you already knew I would. There were no tears left. Not for her. She died with someone at her side. That mattered more than any headline. More than any courtroom. More than justice. In the end, she had presence. And I gave her that. Not forgiveness. Not vengeance. Just presence. The fallout was slow. Like ash settling after a controlled fire. My parents didn't lose everything overnight. They lost it in fractions. The car repossessed. The summer house sold off. The club membership suspended. Friends stopped returning their calls. The ones who stayed only did so out of morbid curiosity. I heard about the will, they'd whisper. Must be hard. But they didn't offer help. No one does when your power dries up. No one carries you when you're the one who dropped everyone else for decades. My mother started appearing on Facebook again. Posting filtered selfies with vague captions like healing is hard, and learning to let go. My father went dark. No posts. No press. Just absence. The kind they'd once handed to grandma like it was a gift. The kind they didn't think would ever come for them. But it always does. That's the thing about ghosts. If you ignore them long enough, they don't just haunt you. They replace you. The legal closure came in a slim manila envelope, signed, sealed, notarized. Every remaining asset transferred to me. The estate, the shares, the home, the residuals. But none of it felt like a win. Not in the traditional sense. It felt like a held breath. Like I could finally exhale. And not because I'd won, but because I'd finished. That's what revenge really is if it's done right. Not rage. Not noise. Just the completion of a cycle. A clean severing. I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for her. Not for them. For me. For the version of myself that spent too many years in the shadows of other people's absences. And I watched the flame burn steady, not for warmth, but for proof. Proof that some endings don't explode. They just go quiet. The unraveling didn't come as a scream or a breakdown. It came as silence. Long aching silence. The kind that hangs between sentences in courtrooms or in the sterile air of retirement condos with no furniture. I heard from a former board assistant that my father had moved into a 2-bedroom rental north of the city. He doesn't say much anymore, she whispered over the phone, her voice cracking like she wasn't supposed to tell me. He just stares. She said he looked smaller now. Not thinner. Smaller. Like the scaffolding of power had collapsed and the man beneath it had never really existed. Just a projection. A habit. A noise with a necktie. I didn't say anything in return. I just nodded and let her fill the space with awkward apologies she didn't owe me. But later that night, I sat in the dark with my phone on the table, wondering if he had stared the same way when Grandma died. Wondering if this was the first time he felt the weight of absence instead of wielding it. My mother tried to claw her way back into relevance. That's the only way to describe it. She started tagging me in old childhood photos on Facebook, captioning them with things like "We all make mistakes, but family is forever." The comments were a mix of pity and confusion. Old neighbors, church ladies, people who hadn't seen her in years asking if we'd reconciled. She even sent me a direct message. Maybe one day you'll understand what it's like to have everything ripped away. That one made me pause. Not out of empathy, but because of the sheer audacity. She didn't realize I did understand. That I'd already been through that fire. Alone, unpaid, unnoticed. She hadn't seen me sobbing on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m. with a cracked ice pack against my shoulder because Grandma had fallen and taken me with her. She hadn't scrubbed dried blood off the tile or spooned applesauce into a mouth that no longer remembered how to chew. But now, because her name was missing from a deed, she wanted to call it grief. I didn't block her. I didn't even delete the message. I just let it sit there unread, like a pebble at the bottom of a river. Time would smooth it. Or erase it. Either was fine. I didn't need vengeance anymore. What I wanted, what I chose, was distance. The kind you don't come back from. The kind that turns people into memories whether they want to be or not. I heard she'd started seeing a therapist. Telling stories about the estranged daughter who turned on them. She rewrote history in the most convenient way possible, with herself as the misunderstood matriarch. Let her. Let her talk. Let her cry into the space she spent years emptying. Let her chase absolution in the mirror. I didn't need to correct the narrative, as I wasn't in it anymore. Not as a daughter. Not as a victim. Just as a blank space they couldn't write over. That winter, I finally opened the blue envelope. It was snowing. Soft and quiet. I had just made tea, and the radiator was ticking like a metronome in a room that felt less like exile and more like sanctuary now. I sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope in my lap, hand steady. I didn't know what I expected, maybe a secret bank account, maybe one last confession, maybe something that would hurt. But it wasn't like that. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's shaky but unmistakable script. Short, simple, devastating. If they ever come back, remember that love is not something you beg for. It's something you give and protect, and receive when it is real. You gave me more in these years than they did in decades. Do not let them take what they never earned. You are my home now. I read it 3 times before I realized I was crying. Not the broken kind of crying. The clean kind. The kind that empties, not breaks. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. It felt like closing a door I hadn't known was still open. I started attending school again. Quietly. Part-time. I didn't tell anyone my last name. I sat in the back, took notes, drank bad coffee, and wrote essays that didn't reference death. I got a few strange looks when I used an expensive laptop, or turned down offers for rides. But no one asked. And I didn't explain. I'd spent too long accounting for myself, apologizing for space I took up. Now I just was. I let myself be the version of me that wasn't buried under other people's needs. The version that didn't have to flinch every time her phone buzzed. The version who didn't feel guilty for taking up silence. And that's when I understood. Revenge hadn't set me free. Boundaries had. The clause wasn't punishment. It was protection. A line drawn in ink and blood that said this far. No farther. Some nights I still dreamt of her. Not the sick version. The early one. Strong. Sharp. The woman who once out-argued 3 men twice her age in a boardroom full of glass and tension. In my dreams, she sat at the kitchen table sipping her terrible instant coffee and smiling like she knew something I didn't yet. I never spoke in those dreams. I didn't have to. She'd just raise her mug, like a toast. And then the room would fill with light. Not fire. Not noise. Just light. When I woke up, I'd stare at the ceiling and whisper. I kept my promise. And somehow I knew she heard it. Knew that wherever she wasn't waiting on apologies from people incapable of them. She had me. And I had myself. That was more than enough. The first thing I bought wasn't a house or a car or even furniture. It was a lilac sapling. Small, crooked, half-wilted when I picked it up from the corner nursery. The cashier asked if I wanted a healthier one. I shook my head. This is the one. I didn't explain. I took it home, planted it in the hard, neglected soil behind the cottage I had just signed for. A plain structure with chipped paint and creaky steps, but mine. Not a mansion. Not a symbol. Just a space where no one had ever raised their voice at me or vanished when I needed them most. I dug the hole by hand, fingers numb, and when the roots touched dirt, something inside me quieted. It didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like permission. To stop surviving. To just live. I didn't furnish the cottage all at once. I bought things slowly. a used bookshelf, a kettle with a chipped lid, blankets that didn't match. I let the house become something I grew into, not something I used to prove I'd escaped. I kept the framed photo of Grandma on the windowsill. Her laughing, half turned toward the camera, sun caught in her hair like a halo. Some days I talked to her. Not out loud, not always. Just under my breath, in the quiet language of people who were once invisible together. I never asked her why she left them so much power in the will. I knew. She wanted to give them one last chance to show up. And when they didn't, she left the door in my hands. It wasn't a trap. It was trust. And I'd used it exactly the way she hoped I would. Not to destroy, but to define. I started volunteering at a care facility not far from the diner. Once a week at first. Then more. I didn't tell anyone my story. Just learned how to listen. How to help without expecting to be thanked. Some of the residents reminded me of her. Some didn't. I learned to fold towels with one hand, while holding someone's tremoring fingers in the other. Learned that grief isn't always loud. That sometimes it sounds like breath. I set up a fund in her name, anonymous. Just a small scholarship for caregivers like me. The overlooked ones. The ones who step in when everyone else steps out. I called it the Violet Clause. Most people wouldn't know why. But I did. And it was enough. My parents never tried again. Not directly. Word filtered in through vague emails from distant relatives. He was keeping to himself. She was focusing on self-care. I imagined them in separate rooms, blaming everything but themselves. I stopped checking. Stopped wondering what they were telling people. It didn't matter. Their version of the story could live wherever it wanted. As long as it stayed away from me. That was the true revenge. Not winning. Not stripping them of status or safety. Just refusing to let them shape me anymore. They could twist the narrative all they wanted. But the chapter with my name on it was closed. They were footnotes now. And I didn't reread them. I found myself writing again. Not for anyone. Just for me. Little things, poems, memory fragments, letters I never intended to send. I wrote about nights I didn't cry because I was too exhausted. About how grief had a smell. About the way she used to say my name like it was the punchline to some inside joke I'd never quite understood until she was gone. I didn't write for healing. Healing had already happened. I wrote to remember. Not her decline. But her defiance. Her warmth. The way she made even the worst nights survivable with a single look. A single word. A single touch of her hand on mine that said, "You are not alone." I kept those pages in a blue folder. Not an envelope. A folder. Openable. Rereadable. A choice. Sometimes people ask if I ever regretted it, blocking them, cutting them off, turning my back on blood. I never answer. Not because I don't know, but because the question itself is broken. It assumes blood is sacred. That legacy is ownership. That what we're born into is what we're obligated to preserve. But what I learned, what she taught me, is that family is what shows up. Family is what stays. Family is what holds your hand in the dark and doesn't flinch when you're ugly, angry, exhausted, unlovable. They weren't family. They were origin points. Biology. Not roots. My roots were planted in midnight meals, forgotten birthdays, and whispered thank yous from a woman no one else remembered how to love. I still have the original letter. The one she left me in the envelope. I don't read it much anymore. I don't have to. It lives in me now. Etched between rib and breath. Some days I think about sealing it again. Tucking it away for good. But then I remember, some things deserve to stay open. Some truths are meant to be revisited, not locked away. I kept the clause. I enforced the clause. And then I outgrew it. That's the part they never understood. That revenge isn't the destination. It's the detour. The real peace comes afterward. When you've reclaimed your own reflection. When you wake up and realize there's no one left to fight. Because you've already won something bigger, yourself. And on the morning the lilac finally bloomed, leaning slightly to the left like it still wasn't sure of its place in the world, I smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was proof. Even the crooked things can take root. Even the damaged can grow. Even something left behind can become home again. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe for more slow burn tales of truth, silence, and quiet power. Leave a comment if you've ever had to walk away to find yourself. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not go back. See you soon in our next story.